Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, crystal ballers. Grab yourself a cup full of digital tea leaves and a pack of augmented reality tarot cards. We've got a whole lot of your future to talk about today here at Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And speak of the devil, here he comes in a headscarf and the biggest hoop earrings you've ever seen. Welcome to the virtual crystal ball and microphone, our technological soothsayer. It's Matthew Dickerson himself.
We are into the future. We don't realise it all the time, but we're into the future.
Yes, that's
before
right.
we know it. So people who don't want to be in the future, it's going to happen. We're travelling through time at 1 second per second, so we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about one. We try and avoid talking about scammers, but I do need to talk about this one because there's a new one that I haven't seen before. And we typically, I think anyway, when we talk about scams, it's normally a variant or some alternative or some other way of trying to trick people out of their money or trick people to do things that they don't want to do. And this is a new one. I had a few people, it's happened to a few people just this last week. It might have been around a bit longer than last week, but I've had a few clients the last week.
This sounds so ominous.
It does, doesn't it? Where they've contacted me and had a problem and just talked through it. And the first time I heard it, I thought that was an interesting one. And I heard another one, then heard another one. So there's been about 3 clients that I've actually seen this with this week. And what they do is, what the scammers do is rely on the fact that most of us, me included, in our Outlook, if we're using Outlook, Outlook calendar, we have the option ticked, which we can turn off, which I may recommend you do turn off, but tick to say if someone sends me a calendar invite, automatically accept it as tentative because it then puts it into my calendar. So for me, that's convenient. Someone sends me an invite, they want to catch up about something, then in my calendar I've got it there. It's not confirmed, it's not, yes, I'm going to be there, but at least I can see it's in my calendar. And I know it's tentative because it's a different colour, it's greyed out, that type of thing. But at least then if someone else contacts me and says, can we get together at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, I look at my calendar and go, oh, actually, I've got a tentative on there. Let me just check that one first. I'll see what that one is, and then I'll let you know whether we can meet at that same time. So that's convenient. But what the scammers are relying on is that most people have that turned on. So they're starting to send out calendar invites where essentially you'll get things pop up in your calendar. Now, you'll get a pop up in your calendar and sometimes you'll go, oh, what's that one there? I better check what that is. I better click on that.
Click on it.
Is that a meeting I'm meant to be in? So they put topics, just like scammers do. They're very good at using psychology to give you topics that are important.
Because, of course, no one would invade your calendar.
No one would invade your calendar. Surely that's sacrosanct. That's left alone. But now suddenly it isn't. And one of the ones, and I must admit, I don't have any idea how this one happened, but one of the ones that I had during the week with someone was they had some calendar invites and I said, right, let's get rid of those. So we got rid of them out of Outlook. And, of course, they did them as recurring appointments. So you can't just delete one because then the next day it pops up, the next day it pops up. So you've got to make sure you get rid of the entire series. And so that worked fine on their computer. But on their phone, those appointments were still there. So when you tried to delete the entire series, it wouldn't work. You delete the individual one, that would disappear and not return. But when you deleted the series, it would then come back. And the only way I worked out to get around this one was to remove their connection to their Exchange server from their phone and then reconnect it, and then those appointments were all gone because they weren't really there as far as Outlook on their computer as far as Exchange was concerned. So
is this is more than just an annoyance, though. This is like you click on it and then you've downloaded something onto your...
Well, typically you'd think you'd click on this link to open up, maybe it's a Zoom call, maybe it's a Teams call, click on this link. You're used to that in an appointment. And if they're clever enough, which unfortunately, I hate saying the word clever and scam together, but if they're clever enough, they put a topic that makes sense to you. And some people are in a corporate environment where they don't really need to be a major contributor to that meeting. They just need to be there to hear the latest update or to hear some information. Sometimes you might have, for example, a franchise that has a meeting that goes out to all the franchisees just to give them an update on something that's going on. So you need to hear about it, but you don't need to be preparing for it, contributing to it. Oh, that's in my calendar. I better go and do that later. So you click on that at the assigned time and I just click on that. And this doesn't look like the meeting that it was meant to be. Where have I gone? What have I done? What am I downloading? Or it might be something where you then go to a page that asks for information to confirm who you are and then put some details in. So all sorts of things. I don't know what they've got when they click because obviously I told my clients not to click on it and I don't want to click on it either. So it's just one of those things though that here's another way they're trying to get information from us. They're trying to drag information from us. And it's a new one. Again, I haven't seen that before. I'd be happy to hear from listeners that said, oh, no, that one was around 2 years ago. But I kind of feel like I am across most scams. I hear about most scams reasonably early in the piece. So this one, I think, for me anyway, is absolutely a brand new
With
one.
personal connection. But so you had the wherewithal to realise that this was a foreign thing, that you wasn't something you just had to check at.
Well, the clients that saw this in their calendar said there's a strange appointment in my calendar. Now, probably the only thing that flagged for them was that the actual appointment that they were meant to be at didn't make sense to them. But if, for example, you work for a supermarket chain and you saw a calendar appointment came in that said new product for our shelves or something like that, something generic, you might go, oh, good, I knew that there'd been some talk about some new products coming. I'll attend that meeting. So that's where they're just relying on numbers as well. They're relying on putting enough out there, a bit like when they send out scams for a bank. They'll focus on one bank. Now, not everyone banks with that one bank, but there might be, let's say a bank has 20% market share. The scammers figure if we send out a bazillion emails, then 20% of those people are going to bank with this bank. So it will make sense to that 20%. The other 80% go, I know that's a scam because I don't even bank with that bank. Yeah. But for 20%, you don't realise. Now, the next week, they do another 20% or another segment of the market. And now it's one that you do bank with. Oh, wait up. What? Someone's made a transaction on my card. I better go and click on that link and stop it. So they're very good at doing that. So they'll just do these calendar appointments that are random, that are titles or subjects that make sense to someone, to as many people as possible. So people think that's a meeting I better be at, and they'll click on that to attend that meeting when it pops up. So, just you have to be so vigilant, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a new one. Happy to hear from anyone who says that it's got something that's been linked to that one. But again, that thing where it just wouldn't remove from the phone either, I thought that was very clever. And I don't know if I want to waste my time looking at how they did that or just go, no, I know how to get around the problem now, so the next time I see it, I can get around it. But it just is so frustrating.
Absolutely frustrating. Well, I'll tell you what's not frustrating. That's the 9 stories we've got lined up for you today. Today we're going to have a look to see if EV trucks are a likelihood in the wide brown land like Australia. And we'll take a look at how the FBI in the States are gaining superpowers. And some massive news about robotic vacuums that can tidy as they go, which is more than a teenager could ever manage, of course. Now, more of that later. Let's get stuck into our first toasty story of the day. As we hurtle headlong into the shorter and shorter days and long frigid nights of winter that last for far too long, we'll turn to whatever sources of warmth and comfort we can find. And Dutch sustainable lifestyle brand Stuve reckon they have a couple of workable tech solutions to warm your digits this winter, Matt.
Well, this is part of a trend called microheating. Now, it makes sense.
Microheating, just heating tiny little things.
Yeah, exactly right, like humans, rather than a whole room.
Okay.
It makes sense when you think about the fact that we do heat up typically a room or an area or a house, for example, when really you don't care about the heat over that part of the room because I just want to be heated up where I am. So Stuve and some other companies as well, but I liked a few of these products where they've got things like heated pillows, heated blankets, and chair pads. So rather than sitting in your chair going, turn the heater on in the lounge room while I watch a movie, you just put a little chair pad heater in and just warm up your, I assume, bottom and back as you sit in the chair and keep yourself warm that way. The blanket makes sense. Heated blankets we used to have as a kid. It used to be so nice to turn the heated blanket on and you'd get in and it was all roasty warm and you'd get in there. But there were a few issues with heated blankets where they tended to catch on fire and some simple things like that.
For a little while there,
I haven't seen many heated blankets. Every now and again you'll turn up to a motel and they have heated blankets, but I haven't seen heated blankets for some period of time. But the one that intrigued me the most was heated pillows. I haven't seen heated pillows before. And I started thinking of the pillow being a kind of soft, squidgy thing, and then somewhere in there you've got to have a battery, and somewhere in there you've got to have some elements. So I wondered about the comfort of that. But I don't feel like my head gets that cold when I go to bed.
Well, I actually feel like a hot pillow, or a warm pillow at least, is going to be a problem because we lose a lot of heat out of our heads. And my head in particular, I get really hot and I want a cool pillow.
Well, sometimes it's nice when you're laying in bed and you just put your hand under the pillow. You go, well, that's cold. I'm going to turn my pillow over. So you turn it over and nice and cold on that side. So I did wonder about that. And then I started looking at the temperatures. So you've got 3 heat settings. You go 38 degrees Celsius, 48 degrees Celsius or 58 degrees Celsius.
What?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's cooked brain right there.
I thought the same without any data to go on. I thought, that seems too hot. I mean, 38 I get. So our body temperature, 38.
Yeah.
Having a pillow at 38, although when you're outside and it's 38, that's hot because we've got no temperature gradient from our body to lose a bit of the heat that we generate while we actually move. So a pillow at 38, I thought, that seems okay-ish, but that seems a bit hot. But then you go to 48 and 58. 58 seems
This must
too
be
hot.
for people who sleep outdoors, surely.
Maybe. Maybe they're sleeping out in some snow area.
Goodness me, but how to cook a brain. I just...
Maybe. So the idea is they've got batteries. So all of these devices, all of these micro heating devices have got batteries in them. These particular ones from Stuve have got about 3 hours that you'll get out of it. So that's not too bad. It's not going to get you through the whole night. That's on high heat setting, but maybe 58. Maybe you don't want to be on that for too long.
Got a cooked brain, then it's not going to matter anymore, so it'll turn off.
That's right. It'll turn off automatically. So the whole idea of this as well is that it should be cheaper to run. So it should be cheaper to heat up you rather than heat up your room. And this is part of a sustainable message, as you mentioned in the beginning. So rather than heat so much area, if you're heating a smaller area, then obviously that's better. And so I think we're going to see more and more of this. And they also use infrared heating, which is obviously a bit better than conventional heating, to basically heat up the direct things that are in contact there. So essentially, microheating, keep an eye out for it. It's happening. Don't know about the 58. Don't know if we'll see some issues with some cooked brains.
I'm interested to hear people who've tried it and liked it.
Look, I do like the idea, even just for things like you go to an outdoor concert and you take a blanket along with you. A heated blanket sounds so much nicer. But you wouldn't normally do that because you'd run an extension cord across the yard and plug it in somewhere. But this has got, they've all got their batteries contained within.
Yeah. Forget your bendy toothbrush with a flexible neck. Forget your fancy schmancy whizzy dizzy electric toothbrush. It's so old school last decade, if you know what I mean. We live in the age of AI. So if your toothbrush doesn't think it for itself, then you can you even say that your teeth are even clean? Matt, the next generation in dental hygiene tech is here and it's reading our teeth.
Reading and analysing what we do. It's hard enough when you go to the dentist every year or two and they say, have you been brushing your teeth for long enough? And you go, oh, yeah, sure I have, knowing that you haven't been. But now to have a toothbrush that tells you that you're not brushing your teeth.
Nags you about it while you're brushing your teeth.
Now, we have done a story before where there was a toothbrush, and I can't remember the brand, but there was a toothbrush that actually gave you a mouth map on your phone while you were brushing. So that was fine. You'd watch there, I need to do a bit more over the left or a bit more over the right, and that gave you the map of your mouth while you're doing it. Now, that one makes sense, but this one is saying, well, it's a bit clumsy to have your phone out while you brush your teeth. And so let's do it all within the toothbrush. So this basically uses AI within the toothbrush. It's got a little smart touchscreen on the handle. It shows your brushing stats, your data. It shows a real-time data, if you like, on where you need to go. It actually colour codes as well. So while you're brushing, if you're brushing too hard, it'll start going red. So in your hand, out of the corner of your eye or in the mirror, you'll see the handle go red because you're brushing too hard. So you get all this data on the handle. Now, of course, it has Bluetooth because we know everything goes better with Bluetooth. So it still connects to your phone so you can look at those stats later. Look at how much brushing you did, look at did I brush long enough, all those things. And I can see some people who do enjoy looking at their data and the stats. And
they love their personal data.
That's right, and they create a spreadsheet out of it.
And I'm smiling because that's me.
Exactly right. I was looking straight at the spreadsheet person there. So the idea here is that you can get all that information, but more importantly, it'll give you the information while you're doing it. Now, they talk about it being a wonderful toothbrush. Regardless of all that, it's got a maglev 3 motor, 84,000 movements per minute, 3 times the cleaning power of a traditional brush. Sounds like an advertising campaign. And more importantly, it's got a nano coating. Now, it seems like nano is a bit of a trendy word to me. Mm-hmm. If I'm in marketing, then I just want to use the word nano in everything I do. Because it seems like that gets people excited.
No. What's got me excited as well is a maglev motor as well. What is that? Anyway, so it's got a maglev motor and a nano
coating. That's right. So the nano coating will resist mould and maintain hygiene.
Folks, you're not going to see anything like this for a long time.
A sticky wall magnet, so you can just hang it on the wall there.
I like that idea.
You know, it's a bit annoying when you put your toothbrush in a cup, which many people do, and you get it out kind of a week later after you've been using it for
And
a
it's
week.
a bit sticky down the bottom.
Well, there's a bit of gunk. There's a bit of liquid there. You're not sure what it is.
Hang on, you're going to stick it on the wall and you're going to get dribble mark down the wall.
Well, at least I feel the drill mark's not on the toothbrush. Whereas
Yeah.
when you stick your
Yeah,
toothbrush in there, you're kind of going, I got to pick that up, and it's kind of a bit goopy down the bottom there. So it sounds pretty cool, but I do love the idea that we're going to get the information on the handle of the
Yeah,
toothbrush
that's
rather
cool.
than just in the app itself.
Now, robot vacuum cleaners are the tech that has potentially had the biggest impact on the domestic scene in recent years. But up until now, it's been pretty much for obstacles that otherwise need to be tidied up. It's not been very good for those obstacles. Up until now, that is. Matt, loose shoes and socks lying on the couch, or by the couch on the floor, I should say, are no problem for the Robo Rock, that is, the Robo Rock 270.
It sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? I actually thought, we keep talking about cartoons and fiction that has developed into the real world, and Inspector Gadget came to mind for this one, because Inspector Gadget has a bunch of stuff that comes out of his hat. So, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's like a magnifying glass comes out and various things come out.
Whatever the cartoonist was looking to pull out of the hat.
That's right, he could do
on
anything.
that day.
It was almost like it was magical. So this is a bit the same as that. It's a robot vacuum cleaner. Most people are familiar with what that looks like. And as it comes along and sees a pair of socks, they don't say undies, but I'm assuming undies as well. When they didn't say undies, I just assumed they were being polite and didn't want to offend anyone. But surely undies would be the obvious thing along with socks that would be left on the ground. And when it approaches those, some robot vacuum cleaners we know just run over them and get them all tied up the mechanism. Well, that's not great. The other thing that we've seen robot vacuum cleaners do is detect things and go around them. So that's good because it doesn't chew them up, but it also doesn't clean them
But
out.
you can also see where the undies were left behind.
That's right. This one comes along, and there's different modes you can program for it, but it can either do one thing, it'll pick it up, take it to a central location, a pre-programmed location, and drop it there. So you could put a little bucket there, for example, to catch the undies and socks, and then keep vacuuming. Or if you thought it was important that those undies and socks were on the ground, it can pick them up, vacuum, and then put them back in exactly the same location. So when you come home, you don't know whether it's been vacuumed or not. Well, it does, doesn't
I vacuumed.
it? I did. You sure? Because the socks and undies are still there. Now I'll put them back where they were.
Yeah.
You sure you did that? So it can pick up things up to about 300 grams. It does look like Inspector Gadget because it's got a little lid or door on top of it that lifts up, and the arm literally comes out and picks it up.
That's
It sounds
fantastic.
a bit eerie, doesn't it?
It's not a cow catcher, folks. It's an arm that comes out and picks it up.
Picks it up, puts them away. It can pick up slippers. It can pick up light shoes. Again, 300 grams is its limit. At this stage, the AI inside it isn't smart enough to pick up toys. So bits of Lego, the classic Lego on the ground that you step on that is incredibly painful. It can't pick up those at this stage. But the manufacturer has said that they're doing software updates. They'll keep updating them as many devices have now. And at some stage, they'll introduce that via a firmware or a software update so it can then recognise toys. But that'd be tough too, wouldn't it? There's a lot of toys out there.
There are.
But wouldn't it just be, if there's anything on the ground, see if you can pick it up. If you can't, leave it there. If you can, pick it up and move it away somewhere.
Yeah.
You might end up with a bin full of socks, undies and toys, which mightn't be that fun getting
I
the
think
toys
this
out
would
of.
be entertaining to watch. I can
I think you're right.
just see it walking around and just feeling stuff around your house. Am I going to pick this up and while I vacuum, or am I going to leave it?
What I also liked is it's almost feeling like you don't trust it, because if it tries to pick something up and it can't, for whatever reason, it can't grip it, it's too heavy for it, it actually takes a photo of the thing that it couldn't pick up, so you
sends
can
it to you.
so you can see that I couldn't pick up this particular item. So again, it feels like, did you try and pick that up? Yeah, I did. I tried, but I couldn't. Are you sure you tried to pick that up?
So what happens when it goes to pick up the dog poo and it gets a bit squishy and just smears everywhere?
I
yeah?
wondered that, because we've seen those famous videos where a robot vacuum cleaner has run over poo, and we've gotten better. We've done stories before about robot vacuum cleaners that can detect poo and go around it and leave it alone. And this one I thought, you might want it to pick it up, but you want to do a soft test first. You want to just do a quick test. Is it squidgy still? Okay, leave it. Oh, it looks like it's dried a bit. We'll just pick it up and it'll be okay. So I suspect at this stage it avoids them, because it probably hasn't got the intelligence to know whether it's squidgy or not. So it's called the Roborock Saros, Saros Z70. So have a look at that. It's a bit rich, $2,900.
But worth it for the entertainment.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? And you say that, and I have sat on my deck and watched my robot my robot lawnmower actually do its job. And sometimes they'll just check how it's going, and you sit there sometimes for a minute and you go, I'll just sat here for a minute watching that because it's just fascinating. So I'm sure this will be even more fascinating because my lawnmower doesn't have an arm that comes out and pick up branches that are on the ground.
You've just sort of thought of something just then. Oh, we've got to get into that. Robot arms on lawnmowers to pick up sticks and stuff.
So we're getting closer. This isn't picking up the clothes off my kid's floor yet, but we're getting closer, James. We're getting closer to something.
We're almost there to Rosie.
That's right, almost there for Rosie. One, just small step at a time.
Big open countries with broad horizons like Australia are indeed trucking countries. Without established trucking routes populated by infinite processions of big rigs, local economies would flounder and probably collapse. Volvo has spotted a big opportunity here and wants to make a bold statement down under. And Matt, Aussies are about to find out just how feasible EV trucking is in a big open country like ours.
And there's a bit of competition in which direction people or companies are going at the moment. We've got another story later on that goes in a slightly different direction. But I think there are companies who are making the big bet on EVs or just using battery powered. And there are other companies who are making a big bet in the opposite direction. So who's going to win? Well, I'd have my money on the electric vehicle side of it at the moment. But this is another example where I think we're seeing that, where Volvo, as you said, have said we're going to bring out more and more, and we know in their vehicles, in their light vehicles, they're saying we're not doing any more new cars in petrol. We're going to go down the EV path. Polestar, for example, is a Volvo brand. But in trucks, one of the things that we've talked about before is that if you've got a trucking route that goes Perth to Sydney, you're probably not going to go electric in the very near future.
No,
it's just not that practical to go those distances with something that you've got to spend a bit of time to charge up. And while those wheels are rolling, you're making money. While the wheels are sitting still, you're not making money.
Well, there's infrastructure to be put in, and there's also just technological development in the batteries and the EV cars themselves.
Yeah, that's right. So I get that. When people say, what about across the Nullarbor? I say, sure thing. It's probably not going to be a great solution for electric vehicle of any description, light vehicle, heavy vehicle, across the Nullarbor. But we've got a lot of trucking routes that aren't across the Nullarbor. We've got a lot of trucking routes that go from a capital city like a Melbourne to some regional locations in Victoria, or a capital city like Sydney into regional locations in New South Wales. And some of those are 50 kilometres, 100 kilometres, a couple 100 kilometres. Yeah. They're not 3,000 or 4,000 kilometres, and that's really where the sweet spot is. So Volvo already has got electric trucks. The range of those trucks at the moment is only about 300 kilometres. But, for example, Linfox, so a huge logistics company in Australia, has already signed up with Volvo to be a major customer. They've ordered 30 electric trucks. They've got 10 already delivered. So at the moment, when you shop at a supermarket like a Coles or a Woolies, you may well have received those products that have come via an electric vehicle. So
that's really interesting. I mean, to take off, there's a lot of scepticism in this country, but for them to take off, we really need a big name to take it on, and Linfox is a big name.
Linfox is a big name, that's right. And when you think about it, wherever that supermarket is, whether that supermarket be 1,000 kilometres from a major distribution point or 50 kilometres from a major distribution point, then it's still got to get there. So an electric truck going 50 kilometres or 100, all those smaller distances, still makes a lot of sense because the concept of electric is still cheaper, still better for the environment than a petrol version or a diesel version. So it still makes sense for those short distances. So I think that's going to be the sweet spot. By 2026, Volvo will have their vehicles, their trucks, with a 600-kilometre range. So it starts to get a bit more attractive then to get further out. So that sounds great. And, of course, then you do need some of that charging infrastructure when you get to those locations. I'm not sure if Tesla would appreciate a truck pulling up at these superchargers and I'm just going to tie up these 6 parts here while I go and plug in my one truck.
Well, yeah, Tesla might not like it, but the drivers who want to use those chargers, they'll probably dislike it more.
Yeah, probably you're right. So they believe, Volvo believes that about 5 years' time, a third of vehicle registrations, truck registrations in Europe will be electric. So they think things are happening. And Europe does seem to be really progressing quite quickly.
But were they also talking about dropping batteries in and out as well?
Well, I don't know what Volvo is doing at the moment. That was one concept, certainly. And when you think about it, and we've done a story previously on this, it makes sense from a truck because just think where a petrol tank on a truck normally is. It's mounted on the side, almost a pod if you like.
Yeah.
That would lend itself absolutely to be a universal pod, no matter what truck you were. Here's the universal pod and the universal connectors. You pull up at your refueling station, in inverted commas, and some device just clips on the side and pulls off your pod, puts on the new one. It would be even quicker than filling up with diesel, because sometimes I've seen trucks pulled up at petrol stations. They're there for a long time because they're putting a lot of diesel into those tanks on the side. So that one would make sense. Getting some agreement, that's the first part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting agreement across the board to say, every truck, this is what you should do, because someone's got to come up with the idea. Someone's got to say, my idea is not as good as your idea, or that idea is the best one. And then all agree and start doing that. But we've done it with things like the actual size of our petrol tank and the size of our petrol bowser. You remember when we've got unleaded and leaded and diesel, there's different size nozzles to make sure people don't put it in the wrong one, although they still do occasionally. I hear stories from time to time where it goes in the wrong one. But we managed to get agreement that, and that makes sense. Don't go and build a petrol tank that's got a different sized hole than what you can handle from a nozzle. So you've got some basic agreement there. I don't know what they're doing with these. I don't know whether they're just normal plug-in or whether they do have the ability to take it out. But the exciting part about this as well is that Volvo will actually be building these here in Brisbane, in Australia, from 2026 as well.
That's fantastic. Bit of manufacturing in Australia.
Yeah, we don't have anywhere near enough of it. But it also makes sense, because if I manufacture a small widget and I can manufacture those very cheaply somewhere, and then I load up a container with 1,000 small widgets, then the transport cost per widget is not much. But when you think about a truck, if I build a truck somewhere, getting that truck from A to B, putting it on a ship and sending it off somewhere, is probably more expensive. So maybe manufacturing here in this country makes more sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And maybe Linfox said, we want to be supporting Australian manufacturing, so if you want us to buy your trucks, maybe you should manufacture some of those here. How much will be done here? How much will be assembly? How much will actually be manufacturing of the raw components? I don't know. I suspect a lot of it will be shipped in as components and then manufactured as in put together here in Australia. But it still is a good first sign, and maybe there's a whole industry that we can basically get through there. Volvo's also looking at their driverless operation. They're still some time away from that, but they are still focused on that. So it's not just Tesla and Tesla trucks that are out there saying we're going to take over the trucking industry and we're going to have driverless operation. So keep an eye out there. There will be some Volvo trucks. I actually think it'll be quite eerie. I haven't heard one yet, but you're on the highway and normally you hear a truck go past and you hear the noise of the truck.
Yeah, and the changing up and down gears and the air brakes and all that.
Well, the air brakes in particular, many signs or many towns have signs out there, no air brakes from this point on. Please don't wake residents, no air brakes at night, that type of thing. So in town, when you do hear the trucks slowing down, even if they're not using air brakes, there's a noise associated with that truck because you've got a big engine, a big diesel engine there. I reckon it'd be quite eerie sitting at traffic lights and just you see in the side view mirror a truck coming along that's pulling up beside you and you're waiting to hear the noise. And
it just appears.
Yeah. It sounds quite cool.
X-ray vision of the kind that led Superman saving the day so many times may no longer be the stuff of comic book myth. The FBI are taking on a new gadget that can see through walls to detect people on the other side. Matt, finding missing people and detecting potential threats through walls. The FBI has just got some superpowers.
They do. Now, did we ever understand how, in terms of the technology, the concept that Superman could see through walls? Was there any ever explanation that he could just...
It came down to the cartoonist at the time, the comic artist, and his imagination.
That's right. So
then no explanation. And if you're born on the planet Krypton, you can just do stuff.
That's right. And look, I get if you're born on the planet Krypton, you might have an incredibly dense planet that's got incredibly strong gravity. So just like we saw people from Earth get on the moon and they bounced around because they had less gravity to deal with, then someone from Krypton...
more muscles on Krypton and the potential to fly.
Well, then that was... So I get that Superman might be able to jump really high, although he was a baby when he came from Krypton to Earth, so how much his muscles have developed, don't get too technical here, but then you can jump a long way.
Overthinking it.
That's right. With the flying part. I didn't ever get the flying part or the seeing through walls.
And what is it? The heat vision too.
The heat vision, yeah.
Yeah, what's that about?
I want to know
how is that
science.
useful on Krypton?
That's right. Did everyone on Krypton just, right, if you say that to me, I'm going to burn you. So I didn't understand some of those, and I never understood the comics that had the X-ray glasses. the glasses that had the little slits through them.
Although I believed in it and I wanted them, but I never
Never laid
saved
down the
enough
50 cents.
money. I never had enough money to buy them.
And again, when I used to read those, I go, so how's that meant to work? Just give me some more explanation in this little advertising.
I didn't care. I was just enticed.
That's right. But apparently, we keep seeing things from cartoons, from fiction come through.
Yeah.
The FBI has said, we reckon we can do that. We're going to work on some science. And in fact, they probably didn't work on it. They probably had some companies working on it. And then they said, now we'll buy the technology off you because it sounds pretty cool. So there's a new system called Detect Presence of Life. So DPL, I assume they're going to call that. And what this does is it's basically a device the size of a lunchbox. It's got radar. You sit it against a wall. You sit it on a tripod and you sit back 2 meters with a controlling device, a tablet of some description. And then with that, it will put a radar pulse of a certain frequency, 8 gigahertz, through that wall and detect enough of what comes back that it can draw a reasonable picture of what's happening on the other side. And when I say reasonable picture, heat blobs rather than details about James is now wearing a blue shirt and pink shorts on. So you get heat blobs of different things that are in that room. So you can detect a human standing up, laying down, moving. You probably can't tell who that is, but if you were following someone enough, so if the FBI was doing a covert operation, and I haven't got any data to back this up, but I think they'd be able to pick heat signatures as different for different people. So once they knew James was entering the building, they could go, there's James's heat blob. So there we go. Every time we see that heat blob, we now know where James is in the building. I assume you want to do that because you want to do something bad to that person. So let's just ignore what you might want to do it for. But the technology here, I think, is a fascinating part. Through bricks, yes. Through gyprock.
Through bricks as well.
Through bricks, apparently not as good, but through gyprock, through timber, yes, all these things. Wow. But you've got to be in the adjacent room.
Yeah, okay.
So
you can't see through several rooms.
No, you can't see rooms away, but you can see the adjacent room. So in the movies, you see them in motels and they take the room next door to the bad guy, and so then they set up this operation on there. Of course, always the good guys using the latest technology. So it does sound pretty interesting, but the Department of Homeland Security is working on now getting it more accurate. So they're working with the company that made this. And of course, the FBI won't officially comment on the purchase, but the company that makes this particular product was listed on the 3rd of April 2025 in the government procurement focus on in terms of the list of all the things they've procured through that month. So you can kind of put 2 and 2 together to say that the FBI is actually using these and testing these out. I might mention already the size of a lunchbox, they're not that big, so it is small enough to carry around, not small enough to put in Inspector Gadget's hat, but certainly small enough to carry around and take to a different particular site that you might want to go to.
Too big to put on a robotic vacuum cleaner.
Too big for that, yes, at this stage. But give it time. I thought the other good part would be a disaster recovery scenario.
Yeah.
So you've got something where a building's collapsed, again, depending how far in someone might be, but by using radar to be able to bounce and then come back through walls, then you could possibly go through brick, through rubble, through other things as well. So sounds fascinating, but it's just a fascinating use of that technology.
And it gives you the upper hand when you're playing hide and seek.
That's exactly what I wanted it for. Murder in the dark, yeah, gone for
You
now.
might have to pay $50,000 or $60,000 for this unit, but
you'd be the best kid on the block.
Now, I'll be the first to confess, I have never been one to enjoy a massage. They're just not my bag. For some people, though, they are the luxury that they cannot do without. But for some other people who have, say, motor impairments and spasticity, they literally cannot do without a regular massage. This is where some clever wearable tech can really come into the format.
So I'm just going to give a quick warning here. I'm going to use the word spastic in my explanation of this story, but I'm not calling someone a spastic.
From a medical point of view.
From a medical point of view, not a colloquial term that people used to use when I was growing up. People would sometimes refer to someone as a spastic. I'm not doing that. I'm talking about this as a medical term. So this is the Exopulse Molly suit, MOLLI. So you know someone in marketing has gotten hold of this particular naming.
Yeah.
So the Exopulse Molly suit, a 2-piece assistive garment that gives low-frequency electrostimulation therapy. And it is, exactly as you said, exactly for people that might have cerebral palsy, they might have spasticity, they might have a stroke, for example, or be a stroke survivor, even people with spinal cord injuries and acquired brain injuries. So what it effectively does is you put this whole suit on and you spend about 60 minutes in that suit. It electrostimulates various parts, and you program it up, so you actually have it set up for you individually, and it will stimulate certain parts, and then the good effects of this will last up to 48 hours. Now, the hope is enough of this long term will have more lasting effects, but if you suffered from some type of muscle dystrophy or some type of muscle issue and you could get relief for 48 hours after 1 hour of treatment, I think you'd be pretty keen on doing that. If it gave longer term effects, fantastic as well, but even in the short term, that sounds like it's pretty reasonable. Better mobility, people said afterwards, they felt like they could actually move things better. And what was fascinating about it is that sometimes you'll have one muscle that is spastic, but not necessarily its opposing muscle. So, for example, some people might have a spastic bicep, but not a spastic tricep.
Yeah, wow.
So that can cause issues where you've got those opposing muscles. So what this will do is it will essentially stimulate the tricep, not the bicep, which effectively allows the bicep to relax more. So it's fascinating in terms of this. So it's basically low-level electrical current. And I know I've had ultrasound on a sprained ankle, something like that, from a physio. And it just gives you that little bit of a tingle, and that's apparently what it feels like in this. When you put this on, it just gives you that little bit of a tingle. You know something's happening. You know that there's some sort of electricity going through.
So you wouldn't necessarily feel the muscle twitching, because that's another thing that's annoying for me.
Yeah, right.
When you get the muscle twitches, the little spasms in your muscles.
Yeah. So my toe, I get someone on a toe sometimes, and you're looking at it, it's kind of going out to the side and just going, stop. But your brain's not sending the signal to the toe, or maybe it is, and it's just ignoring it. So, yeah, it does sound quite fascinating. It was developed in Sweden by a team of physicians, engineers, and neuroscientists, and then essentially they think that after several weeks in this, you will get some longer-term effects. I don't know how long in terms of longer-term effects, but that's something they're still working on now. So anyone that's got some of those issues, we've still got work happening to try to help people that have got some of these diseases, some of these issues that we don't know any cure for.
Yeah, some physical therapy there that come well in handy, and seemingly fairly easy to come by too. Yeah,
it seems like it is pretty easy to get hold of. It's out there in Australia and New Zealand at the moment, so pretty easy to get hold of. You see that clinical assessment first of all, and away you go.
The high stakes of professional motorsport are fairly unforgiving. Pit stops run at 2 seconds for a full tyre change. Laps are timed to 1,000th of a second, and the difference between pole position and the back of the grid is merely a couple of seconds tops. Is it any wonder that in the MotoGP world, Ducati's bikes have just about as many data collection devices on them as you could probably fit? And any more, and the rider might need to ride in the sidecar, Matt.
I do enjoy my MotoGP. I used to race motorbikes when I was a kid, so as I got older and realised that maybe I wanted to keep all my limbs intact, I retired gracefully from the sport.
Had enough broken bones.
That's right. And then, but I became a bit of a fan and watched a bit, and I remember it was back about 1995. Mick Doohan it would have been his second World Championship year, and I went down to Eastern Creek, and that was when the Australian GP was at Eastern Creek, not out at Phillip Island. And I remember going down there with a few friends of mine that I used to race motorbikes with, and we're watching and obviously seeing sport at its pinnacle, whatever that sport might be, is always fascinating. Whether it's tiddlywinks or whether it's tennis or whether it's MotoGP, it's absolutely fascinating. Now, back in 95, it was called 500cc. They did change that because it got to the stage where they went away from two-stroke bikes and they went to larger bikes, so they didn't want to call it 990cc, so it became MotoGP. But back in those days, 500cc, Mick Doohan was the king of the castle, 5 in a row. It must be 94, and then 5 in a row after that. So in 95, we were down at Eastern Creek watching. I remember being down at the end of the first straight. It's about a kilometre long. They're doing about 300 k's an hour. Back in those days, they're faster now. And we were watching, a few of us were just sitting there, and all we were watching for a few laps in a row was Mick Doohan's right hand. And where he braked, where he went from flat-out accelerator to putting his fingers on the brake, was just so much later than everyone else. And it was just fascinating to see these guys, the best in the world and the best riders, and all on machinery, different manufacturers, but machinery that was all very equal, just to see how much deeper into the corner he braked. Now, back in those days, they didn't have a bazillion sensors on them. They certainly had some technology in the motoring, but these things were beasts. And so the riders were just the guys that were the bravest, that could hang on the longest. They happened to hang out there, and Mick was a champion of that. So, I actually met Mick Doohan about 2 decades later, and I actually told him that story. And I said, I remember watching you, Mick, and just seeing how much further ahead. He won that particular race by about 13 seconds, which is an eternity, as you said, and some of the things measured in thousandths of a second. So I remember seeing that and just going, wow, that was fascinating. But that wasn't Mick looking at a bunch of data. That was Mick going, I reckon I can push it deeper. I reckon I can go a bit longer in this
Just
corner.
going by feel.
That's exactly it, by the feel of their pants. So anyway, I read that story to Mick and he obviously was fairly humble and didn't go, yep, that's right, I used to brake later than everyone. But again, it was all about that. It was just about the feel and just pushing it in each corner. You just try a bit deep and, I overcooked that one. But now, and Ducati are the king of the cast at the moment. So Ducati didn't win their first constructors title until 2007. Now, MotoGP started, or 500cc as it was called back then, back in 1949. Ducati haven't been involved all those years.
But Ducati's one of the old bike makers, aren't they?
They are old bike makers, and I know my brother, or two of my brothers had Ducatis, and the joke when I was a kid growing up and seeing my big brothers with the Ducatis, the joke was that when you bought a Ducati, you had to buy a second motorbike because the Ducati was off the road so often being repaired that you need another motorbike. Now, they've progressed a long way since then. So first constructors title in 2007. They didn't win their second constructors title in 2020, but since then they haven't been headed. So 2020 through till now, they've won it every year.
Dominating.
They just matched Honda's record, and they matched it, and then it was broken, of 22 consecutive races won by Ducati.
Wow.
So they are the king of the castle now. So there's no surprise that they've taken a Formula One approach to MotoGP. It used to be, the back in the Mick Doohan era, the general scenario was it was about 80% rider, 20% bike. So you took that one rider, you took Mick Doohan and put him on any bike in the field, and he was going to be up near the front. He might not win on every bike, but he was going to be up near the front because it's so much about the rider, and you needed a reasonable bike. Formula One, they often say, is 20% the driver and 80% the car, because all those drivers are very equally matched, but it's just who's got the best car. MotoGP's taken that bit of approach and said, well, let's do what Formula One does and just introduce so much technology. So now MotoGP with Ducati, they started a partnership with Lenovo back around 2017, 2018 it might have been, and they said, we want you to just give us so much data that we can adjust and fine-tune everything on these bikes. Now, MotoGP is a bit different to Formula One. You can't have live during the race data, and you can't have live communication with riders. So in Formula One, there's engineers back in the pits that can say, oh, it looks like you're overheating your brake in the corner 7, so just make sure you don't brake quite as hard there because we can see the temperature rising there. So they can give the drivers verbally direct feedback about what's happening with their car. MotoGP says no, pit board, the good old-fashioned pit board is all they've got to communicate with the riders during the race, and that's it. And they're not allowed to read live data. But when they come back in, and I watch it when I watch MotoGP, the bike comes back in, straight away one of the engineers goes over to download data from the bike so they can then sit down with the rider, and they sit down with the computer and start going through it all. And what they go through is incredible. 50 sensors on a Ducati to collect detailed performance data, 350 turns in a race, so there's a lot of information there. Sensors that have things like tyre rotation, so is your tyre spinning, for example, compared to the road speed, the speed you're going, the grip, the acceleration, the lean angle, even the braking points. And again, when I spoke to Mick Doohan that day about braking points, it was like, oh yeah, there was a marker there, and I knew to brake a bit after that. They're getting to the point now with Ducati, they've got 3 teams in MotoGP, 6 riders. They compare all the data across those 6 riders, and they found that, hey, it looks like James is braking 2 metres later into this corner. So if he can do it, the bikes are all very similar. I reckon you could do it as well. Now, when you're doing 354 kilometres an hour, and you say brake early. 2 metres, I want to brake earlier, that's right. But you say brake 2 metres later, then that's got to be, what, a hundredth of a second? It's got to be such a small amount of time different. And if you miss that by another 2 metres, suddenly you're too fast into that corner, and then you've got troubles about running wide or running off the track or whatever. But it's absolutely fascinating just how much data. Now, how does this help us? Well, all of this data that's fed back in can then eventually be used in road bikes. So can you get to the stage where you've got better control over that bike, better suspension control, even ride height? They're talking about the differences when they change ride height by a millimetre. Now, most of the bikes on the MotoGP track now have got a ride height device that as you come out of a corner, the riders trigger that, so it actually squats it down on the rear end to give you slightly better grip as you come out of a corner, rather than wasting energy compressing the suspension.
And we're talking about millimetres here.
Millimetres, and as you said, a thousandth of a second for some of these things. So it's worthwhile watching a MotoGP race and just watching what happens in the pits just to get a bit of an idea and a bit of a feel for all this data. And I used to get a bit frustrated a few years ago. I heard a lot of the drivers in Formula One do it, but then riders in MotoGP started doing it as well, where they talked about, we did this, we did that. I mean, it was you on the motorbike. It wasn't, you didn't have a team. But then when you start to think about all the work that's done back in the pits, it really is a we. That rider might be hanging it all out there, but unless they've just got some of those
Unless they've got the engineers behind them.
Ah, that's right. So you don't want to talk harshly to those guys, do you? Right, I'm going to put that rider up by a millimetre. That'll show you. You won't do that again. So the other thing they do, which I find fascinating, is they do a digital twin of each circuit. So they get about 200 gigs of data from the bike, create a digital twin. So back in the factory, they can be doing simulations on the circuit as it is today based on that motorbike, and then back in the simulator try things like, let's change that ride height by a millimetre. Let's change the compression on the forks by 2% or whatever it might be. So it is quite fascinating. So, but all that engineering, all that data, you do wonder about the riders, but they're still daredevils. They're still going down the straight at 354 kilometres an hour.
And look, I've heard from other people riding motorbikes that once you get up to sort of 160, 170, you're really holding on for your life.
You are.
So if you double that speed, perhaps aerodynamics pushes you onto the bike more at that speed. But
there was an example recently where one of the riders had an incident, and it just cracked his fairing. So they've got a fairing they tuck him behind. So he rode the rest of the race with that fairing cracked. And at the end of the race, he was talking to his team about just how bad his neck was feeling because suddenly he was being buffeted by 350 k/h winds rather than being able to be tucked in behind that fairing. So
all the extraneous muscle strain there.
Absolutely. And you think they'd be used to that anyway, because even when they're riding and they're sitting up for a corner trying to help with their body braking with air resistance, they're still being buffeted by 150 k winds. But because they down the main straight, he's trying to tuck in, but he couldn't get behind enough of the fairing. That made a difference there. So they are still absolute daredevils.
Yes.
They're still people who take incredible risks for reasonable rewards, I think.
Yeah.
but the engineering that's going towards now is quite incredible.
In the early days of automobiles, it used to be the practice to employ someone to walk in front waving a red flag as a warning. Well, that didn't stop manufacturers designing cars to go faster than walking pace, though, and soon they had to do away with the guy with the red flag. Nowadays, speeding is responsible for almost half of the road fatalities in New South Wales, and the stats are pretty similar or worse in most other Western societies. It's high time for technology to step in here, Matt.
It is, and we've just gone from a story about going way too fast
to trying to slow people down.
Exactly right. So this is, and the stats out of the US are not quite as bad as that, but they say super speeders, habitual speeders, are responsible for 29% of all traffic fatalities in the US. I have no doubt in New South Wales,
New South Wales was about 42%.
Yeah, so it's a lot. You're talking about a third or more of deaths are caused by speeding, which makes sense. And I know sometimes when I go along, there's a Rotary group that does a talk called Rider, where they try and instruct kids to basically be safe on the roads.
Yeah.
And I know I go along and do some talks there sometimes, and I get the kids to pace out about 27 metres. And I say from there to there is about how far you travel in 1 second at 100 kilometres an hour. So just look down at your phone for 1 second and look up. You couldn't even read that text message in a second, but you just travelled that far. That's at 100 k's an hour. So 110, 120, as we keep increasing that speed. Or if you're doing 100 k's an hour down a street that should be 50 k's an hour, for example, that can make a huge difference. So habitual speeders basically are causing a lot more deaths than normal people, normal drivers. And so when you've got some of these things happening, what do the courts do with these habitual speeders? You can say you lose your licence, but unfortunately there was an incident just back in March this year where in Brooklyn there was a mother and two children that were killed by an habitual speeder. He'd already had his licence suspended. So it didn't really make a difference. Suspending someone's licence doesn't stop you getting in the car. When you have someone who is caught drink driving too often, they are forced to put on a device in the car they've got to breathe into before they can actually start the car. So that is protecting them from themselves and protecting the rest of society from that person. Well, they've now got devices, two types of devices, that will actually limit your speeding. So there's a thing called an ISA, an Intelligent Speed Assistant, and you've got those now that the courts are sometimes mandating that a driver, you're an habitual speeder, you're a danger to you and everyone else on the road, we're going to make you slow down. And so just like we see with some of the passive devices that we've got in cars now, a beep will go off, an alarm will go off, there'll be something flash up on your dash if you're going over the speed limit. These do that, but they stop you at that. So you can't go faster than that. Now, some people have said that's dangerous because what if in an emergency and I've got to go a lot faster? Well, the times in an emergency you've got to go faster. I'm just trying to think of all the emergencies I've been in. The brakes were the most important part of the car, not the accelerator. I can't remember going, I know, I'll go faster here and that'll get me away. Yeah. I get that if you're overtaking and suddenly you realise there's a car coming at you, you might want to accelerate them, but braking would still probably work okay in most situations. So they've got some of these that have got a red button to try and keep those people quiet, a red button that they have mounted to the dash that you can use 3 times a month to go over the limited speed that you've got.
3 emergencies a month.
3 emergencies a month. So it's a pretty dangerous situation you're in if you've got 3 emergencies a month.
How many emergencies you have in
a lifetime?
Yeah, well, sorry, out of 100 trips, you might have maybe 1 emergency, maybe. So it's less than 1%, and then of those 1%, it's probably less than another 100th of times that you actually need to go fast.
That's right. So that's one way to try and keep people that are worried about this, limiting people to say, no, that's not correct. We need this sort of situation. They do allow a buffer of about 8 kilometres an hour over the speed limit, and we've talked about that before. The speed limit's the speed limit. So if you go 101 and 100 zone, you're still breaking the law. Yeah. This would allow these people to go to 108, which I suggest they would probably go to 108 all the time. They use GPS, digital maps and sensors to pick up speed limits on the side of the road, just like cars do now. And I suppose the big thing I wonder is how long will it be before we get to the stage where these are just on every car? In Europe, they've got passive speed assistance on every car. It's mandated. You can't buy a new car anywhere in the European Union without it having passive assistance, which is that thing like alarm bells or things that pop up on the dash. But I wonder how far it'll be before we get to the stage where we have intelligent speed assistance that's compulsory on vehicles, because surely it would save lives. Is there any reason, if you set the speed limit at a certain speed, is there any reason a government of a land says, oh yes, that's okay, but we know there's another group of people that need to go faster than that, so we're okay not to have controlled speeds in our vehicles?
People in the government saying, but we just like to travel fast.
We're important. We need to get from A to B faster than everyone else, maybe. I'm not sure. But it's interesting. We're doing so many things to try and reduce the road toll. This, to me, seems like an obvious thing that you can do to reduce the road toll. Yep. If there's 42% of deaths caused by speeding, well, just have a device in your car, which the technology's there to limit the speeding. And we've talked about it before. It's funny how car manufacturers put various specs in their cars. They always put the top speed, 240 kilometres an hour, 250 kilometres an hour. Well, I haven't driven on a road. I've been on the racetrack at that speed, but I haven't been on a road doing 240 kilometres an hour. Do I care that my car can do 240 kilometres an hour? Is there any reason I need that unless I'm going to go on the racetrack? And most people don't go on a racetrack with their car.
There's also an issue, and I'm sorry, P-platers, I'm going to pick on you now, is that there's a period of your life where your confidence far outstrips your expertise. And so
are you saying when you put the
you feel like you feel like you've been driving, pardon me, long enough to be able to handle your car, and therefore you can do over 100 in a 60 zone safely. That's where your confidence is overextending past your expertise and your understanding.
There's a big part of that is experience as well. When you say to someone that's younger, don't want to sound like I'm ageist here, but when you say to someone younger, well, don't do that because this could happen, and the answer is often, well, that'll never happen.
That would not happen to me.
Well, to me, that's right. That's exactly right. But when you get a bit older, you go, well, no, this has happened to me, or I know a friend of mine that's happened to, or I read an article in the news where that happened. So these things can happen to anybody, unfortunately. So,
look, and I was cleaned up on the side of a road by someone who was testing his driving prowess, doing 100 in a 60 zone.
Yeah, there you go. So, and you got the scars to prove it.
That's it, yeah. Anyway, look, anything that makes the roads a bit safer can't be a terrible thing.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? And I just wonder how long we will get to before the stage some of these things, breathalyzers, compulsory speed limits, built into the car, and maybe that's one of the ways that we'll get safer roads with driverless cars, where you won't be able to program that little bot on your car to go faster.
Can of worms being opened up right there.
With someone offering a hack.
There's some high-level murmurings going on amongst some big names in the motor industry. Some EV plans that people had been hoping for are now being downgraded. What's the news coming out of Honda just now, Matt?
I'm pretty disappointed about this one, actually. Honda and Nissan had been in merger talks. Those mergers include Mitsubishi. And I don't know if the entire reason, but the majority of the reason they were going down that path was because they realised they needed to compete with Tesla, with EVs. They needed to compete with some of the Chinese EV manufacturers, and they were behind the times, which is unusual for Honda in particular. I've always seen as a very progressive company. They've been involved in F1 for a long time. They are the most successful MotoGP team in history. So you kind of feel like they are at the forefront of technology. But a few Japanese manufacturers, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, have all dropped the ball when it came to EVs. They didn't see it coming.
I reckon it's just because they just had so much confidence that ICEs were just going to be always needed.
Well, I think there's that. I also think a bit of complacency. When you're at the top, like Toyota, for example, when you're at the top, you think you're always going to be at the top, and you don't notice some of the underlings who are murmuring away, and then before you know it, they've knocked you off. And so I thought it was a good move where they basically had realised that they weren't able to compete with some of these manufacturers, and they were so far behind that if they went and developed the technology themselves, there was a long development process, and it was going to be expensive, and were they going to be viable during this process? So let's combine our resources. Let's come up with a common platform, for example, or combine our resources to develop batteries and motors and do all that. But for whatever reason, I don't know why the talks fell down, but they basically announced that they'll now go it alone. And one of the things that is significant in that is that Honda has said in particular, and I haven't heard much from Nissan, but Honda have said they're deferring their investments in EV until 2031.
Oh, that's a long way away.
That's a long way away. Now, we believe, this is Honda believing, that 2030 to 2040 is the decade that will be known as the EV era. But that's a big risk. If you're going to defer your investments in EVs to 2031, that means if let's say they're right, and 2030 to 2040 is the EV era, then people are going to be buying EVs in that era. They're going to be looking for people that have got cars that are EVs then, not we'll now start the investment, and in 2035 we've got this great car coming, and by then people have already bought a new brand.
It's like a party's been humming for a long time, and then you show up being a big party and we'll go, hey, I'm here, and everyone doesn't care because they're too busy partying.
You're talking from personal experience here, James. So what Honda is doing is a bit like the Toyota messaging. They're going to invest in hybrid electric vehicles. So they've got 13 new hybrid models coming out from 2027 to 2031. Now, I could be completely wrong. Far be it for anyone to go and invest their shares or their portfolio in what I'm about to say, but I really think that by 2027, if they've got new hybrid models coming out, 2027, people will be driving EVs. People will be buying EVs. Chinese manufacturers are going well. We already know about Tesla. We know about companies like Polestar we talked about with Volvo. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, lots of these manufacturers, Volkswagen's putting a big emphasis on EVs today, not 2031.
Yeah.
So hybrid in 2027 will be absolutely so yesterday, in my opinion. So not saying this category will be where it is. So what Honda says is they're going to meet the market where it is today with hybrids rather than meet the market and lead the market. But look, I do think there is a job for manufacturers to be market leaders rather than just market followers. So it is a bit, I suppose, disappointing. I don't know what Nissan's doing. See, Nissan came out with the Leaf. The Leaf, and I've got a Leaf now. I bought a previous Leaf, so this is my second Leaf I've owned. The Leaf was pioneering, and so Nissan really put a big bet on that. Now, they haven't gone fantastically because maybe they were a bit early and then maybe they lost a bit of confidence. But to be such a pioneer and to be so early in the market with an EV and then now to be floundering, not sure where they're going.
Yeah, they've really gone to sleep on it.
They have, and they're confused, I think, a little bit about where they should be going. But I think the ones that are going to be successful are the ones that are saying, this is our strategy going forward. We know it's an EV world, that's where we're going. So, yeah, a bit disappointing, and I will be fascinated to see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all we have time for today, folks. The cassette is almost out of tape and the record button is going to pop in any second. Thanks for a cracking tech talk though, Matt.
Thank you, and I am going to definitely get one of those toothbrushes. I've resisted some of the other ones, but I do like the sound of this latest toothbrush.
Well, I'm going to get one of those robot vacuum cleaners with the arm, and you can borrow it sometimes.
Oh, thank you.
Just to watch it.
I would have to have
waste
Inspector
the
Gadget
day.
music playing with it, though. I just don't think it would be appropriate without some Inspector Gadget music.
And then maybe you can attach things to the arm so you can have a pair of scissors, or
That's
you can
right.
have like a comb or a helicopter or something come out.
No danger there at all.
All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. It's a homegrown and hand-picked podcast, and so you know it's going to be good for you. I'm James Eddy, your host, and it's a pleasure for me to bring you, for us to bring you our podcast each week. And we look forward to seeing you in another week's time when we've got a brand new, fresh episode for your listening ears. We look forward to that moment then. Until then, all the best.